Before you begin looking at the way that we do our joint locks here, I just want you to take a short listen to a little bit about why we do what we do and the way we do it. The joint locks that we do are based on a basic 1 through 10 of motion that is used by the United States Korean Martial Arts Federation. And we break it out a little bit differently than the numbering system that is used there, but the locks are pretty much exactly the same. And what we're going to do with these little video chunks is help you get a little better understanding about how these locks work and the basics behind making them happen. One of the things I want to acknowledge is that we start learning these from a wrist grab. And one of the criticisms of this is that, well, who's going to come up and grab your wrist? That's not a practical thing. And certainly, I mean, it's much easier just to yank your wrist out of somebody's hand than it is to move into some of these joint locks. But the training piece to this is that arguably the wrist is one of the most awkward places to try to get the release from. And so when you're learning them from this basic position, it teaches you certain grips, certain ways of controlling your opponent, and it teaches you a little bit more, I think, a little bit more intimately the mechanic that happens when you're doing a technique. So while you may not necessarily do it against a wrist grab, you become very familiar with the motion, and chances are this lock or these locks will be applicable from a variety of different positions. And so that if you know how an S lock or a number 3 works, when somebody grabs you, if they grab you like this on the shirt, you see that and you realize, oh, they've already put their hand in that position, so it's already there. It's a much simpler process to move into the technique. You know, likewise, someone comes up and grabs you up under here like this. Well, you're going to find that that position puts their hand and their body in a place where you can very readily do a number 5. We sometimes call it a sandwich technique, and you'll see that technique show up in one of the chunks that we do. So that's a little bit behind the methodology of what we're doing. The second piece is this. The wrist locks I break down into 3 chunks, because what we found is that there's 3 primary ways that we release and re-grab the other individual. So we have one chunk that I call the trap and slingshot, and basically it's because you're going to trap their hand on your wrist so it's in position, and then you're going to make this with your hand, which is just like a slingshot, and that's how you're going to come up under and re-grab your opponent to move into that technique. And there's 3 techniques that go into that chunk. So if we work on that chunk in class, you're going to be practicing that release over and over every single time. The second we call Game Boy or text message, and it's a release where when you finish up, your hands are in this position on the back of your opponent. And what that looks like is if you're sending a text message or playing a Game Boy. And then we move into 4 different variations that go off of that grip. So that Game Boy text message is going to be a chunk. The third chunk is called palm up, and the release is simply this. You're going to pull your palm upwards, and then you're going to move into one of 3 different motions, either straight in, under the arm, or around the arm. And so we break it into chunks, and then in the chunks we have a little bit of language to help you remember where to stop your motion. For example, in the slingshot chunk, we have part way, halfway, and all the way. So it tells you where you're going to stop on the spectrum of the rotation. Part way, you're going to stop here in the middle. Halfway, you're going to stop here at the hip. All the way, you're rotating completely over and all the way to the ground. With the Game Boy, we do the same thing. We have part way, halfway, all the way, other way. One is a 1-step where you're going to go under the arm once. That's part way. Halfway, you take 2 steps, so you want to beside the person. All the way, you come all the way back around. You're facing the person. And other way, you're going to go under the arm the opposite direction that you have for those first 3. So if you can get your head around that language, it'll help you remember exactly what you're doing with each of these chunks, and hopefully it'll help you to retain it and practice it a lot more genuinely. So enjoy those segments.